contrary to what many of you may think, the bubonic plague, which caused the Black Death, was far from an isolated incident in Europe. In fact, this disease rampaged Europe for many years prior and many years after the infamous Black Death. In this video, I'm going to be talking about just one of these such incidents with the horrific Plague of Justinian. This catastrophic outbreak of the bubonic plague was the first to ever hit Europe and was first reported by the Byzantine historian Procopius in 541 from the port of Pelusium near Suez, Egypt. Two other first-hand reports of the plague's effects during the early days were by the Syriac church historian John of Ephesus and Evagrius Scholasticus, sorry if I'm mispronouncing those, who was just a child in Antioch, now known as Antakya in Syria, at the time of the outbreak, but later became a church historian. Notably, this guy, Evagrius, was actually afflicted with the buboes associated with the disease, but miraculously survived. Quite depressingly though, his family were not as lucky, as during the disease's 4 returns in his lifetime, he lost his wife, a daughter and her child, other children, as well as most of his servants and people from his country estate. According to contemporary sources, such as his, the outbreak in Constantinople, which would prove to be the hub via the disease spread throughout much of Europe, was thought to have initially been carried to the city by infected rats on grain ships arriving from Egypt. Procopius, who was another Greek historian, recorded that at its peak the plague was killing 10,000 people in Constantinople daily. However, the accuracy of this figure is in question and the true number will likely never be known, though some modern scholars estimate that the plague may have killed up to 5,000 people per day in Constantinople at its peak. Regardless, Procopius would further record that because there was no room to bury the dead, bodies were left stacked in the open as a grim precursor to the Black Death many centuries later. Later in life, Procopius would recount in his secret history the devastation the plague caused, as well as the ruthless response by the hard-pressed Emperor Justinian, who the plague is named after, stating, "When pestilence swept through the whole known world, and notably the Roman Empire, wiping out most of the farming community, and of necessity leaving a trail of desolation in its wake, Justinian showed no mercy towards the ruined freeholders. Even then, he did not refrain from demanding the annual tax, not only the amount at which he assessed each individual, but also the amount for which his deceased neighbours were liable." Elsewhere in Europe, as the disease spread to port cities around the Mediterranean, the struggling Goths were reinvigorated and their conflict with Constantinople entered a new phase. The plague had predictably weakened the Byzantine Empire at a critical point when Justinian's armies had nearly retaken all of Italy and the western Mediterranean coast. This evolving conquest would have reunited the core of the Western Roman Empire with the Eastern Roman Empire, and although this did eventually occur in 554, it did not last long, when in 568 the Lombards invaded northern Italy, defeating the small Byzantine army that had been left behind and establishing the kingdom of the Lombards. To the west of Italy, Gaul, which is mostly modern-day France, was also said to have suffered severely during the disease, and by virtue of its proximity, it is unlikely that Britain escaped the clutches of this pandemic, although historical records of 6th century Britain are extremely poor, so there are no unequivocal attestations of the plague reaching the islands. By the time it was all said and done, the total death toll caused by this outbreak of the bubonic plague is understandably hard to say with any certainty. It is worth noting though that unlike the Black Death, and unfortunately for the people at the time, this outbreak was not a one-and-done affair, and continued to reoccur for 200 years, before finally ending for good in the mid-8th century. Some historians believe that this pandemic was one of the deadliest pandemics in history, resulting in the deaths of between 15 to 100 million people during its 2 centuries of recurrence, which would be a death toll equivalent to 25 to 60% of Europe's population at the time. As for Constantinople, the city which became the unfortunate hub for the disease, one view argues that the initial plague killed around 40% of the city's inhabitants, and caused the death of up to a quarter of the human population of the eastern Mediterranean, with frequent subsequent waves over the next 200 years, slowly becoming more localized and less deadly. Ultimately, we will likely never know exactly how many people met their end due to this horrible disease, but what is known for sure is that those unfortunate people suffered through one of the, if not the most horrific diseases to ever hit the planet, for 200 years on and off, with tragically many of them meeting their end as a result. Even those who survived inherited a wasteland ravaged by disease, which would take decades at the least to recover from, just in time for another outbreak some centuries later. well, I think that's where I'm going to end the video, guys. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this from me. With all that being said and out the way though, as always, I hope you guys have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I hope to see you in the next one.